Shepherd's Advantage Leadership Podcast, Episode 001. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this inaugural episode of Shepherd's Advantage Leadership Podcast Series. I am so very excited that you have chosen to come and be with us today in this inaugural run. I'm very excited about the prospect of what this podcast series is going to do for nonprofit leaders. I am believing that this podcast is going to be of great help and of great asset to all leaders. Our goal is to be able to add value into people's lives. Shepherd's Advantage began as an outgrowth of a committee assignment that the Reverend Charles Crank, a district superintendent for the Assemblies of God, a great man of faith, referred to as the Walking Bible. He put together a blue ribbon committee a number of years ago to research how we can connect better and relate better to ministers, to one another, with a belief that we can improve on what we're doing. And so out of that came principles and ideas that began to shape a dissertation that I didn't know that I was even going to write, which developed into Shepherd's Advantage that I didn't even know was going to exist. And so, with those humble beginnings, Shepherd's Advantage has come into existence, and here we are in our inaugural episode of Shepherd's Advantage Leadership Podcast Series. Again, I am so very delighted that you are with us. My name is Gary Brackett. I am your host and director of Shepherd's Advantage. This podcast series is going to be about making a difference with people who make a difference while doing something that makes a difference. So I don't want to just take up your time with so much factual information and tidbits and insights per se, but I really want to add value into your leadership style and capability. I want to help you reach your potential. So, the foundation of all that is going to be Shepherd's Advantage podcast series is going to be built upon the laws of leadership. The laws of leadership. I know that there are many of them. You can Google search, and I'm going to talk about some of that, but we'll take a look at the laws of leadership because that's where we're going to begin. We began with these foundational laws. It's a very, very important foundation to build upon it and to have a solid foundation in which to move forward. Also, I just want to mention to you that one of our premier offers as Shepherd's Advantage is our executive coaching program. I want you to know that I come to you with over 25 years of experience in executive coaching, and I can be reached through our blog site at Shepherd's Advantage Inc. That's INC.com. Shepherd'sAdvantageInc.com. Also, I'd like to give a big shout out at the beginning of this program to David Irrefutable for the music that is provided, Gratitude Mood. You can learn more about David Irrefutable at www.songsofdavid.com. Thank you, David, for your contribution to this podcast series. I am indebted to you. He is allowing us to be able to use this music at no cost But I do want to give a shout out, and all of this is in our show notes to where you can access more of David Aravet's Christian jazz music. He's an awesome musician, and boy, for me, I absolutely just love jazz music. Well, as I mentioned, this podcast is a presentation about nonprofit leadership. And of course, I'm well aware of the fact that leadership principles go across the board, regardless of whether it's nonprofit or for-profit. Leadership principles are what they are. But my illustrations and my passion and drive in life is going to center around our nonprofit leaders. And so I want to begin at this outset of this journey, this inaugural journey, with a foundation of laws of leadership. In fact, we're going to be using the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John Maxwell as a foundation. I believe that he has perhaps the most comprehensive list of these laws, but we're going to use that as a foundation. And so in this first session, we're going to take a look at introductory matters, and then we are also going to look at the first law. And so we want to begin. Albert Einstein said it best: "You cannot change your circumstance with the same thinking that created it." The leader must grow his or her competencies by challenging the status quo thought process. That process of growth begins with a review of the laws that govern the function of servant leadership. Now, I believe that servant leadership is not just germane to nonprofit, but I find that leadership in any context, if it is built upon a servant mentality, that always wins the day. So even if we're trying to swell the bottom line of corporate profits, or whether we are chasing after our nonprofit passions, I believe that always servant leadership is what is to be preferred and what should be pursued. So, Albert Einstein puts us on good footing. You cannot change your circumstance with the same thinking that created it. Listen, leadership is leadership no matter where you go and what you do. Time changes, technology advances, and cultures are different from place to place. But leadership principles, they remain constant, don't they? Methodologies change, but the underlying principles are true and they are fixed. Therefore, you can ignore the principles, or as we refer to them as laws. You can ignore it. You can choose to do that. It is your prerogative. But there's one thing that you and I cannot ignore, and that is the consequence. When you do a cursory Google search of leadership laws, so let's talk about this for just a moment and take a look at some of my findings. When you Google it, just type in leadership laws, what you're going to find is that John Maxwell's 21 Laws of Leadership is number one. It is at the top of the search. And I believe for good reasons. John Maxwell's 21 laws are perhaps the most comprehensive of listing of laws that are available for us to read in leadership material. Followed behind that, you'll find Warren Blank's 9 Natural Laws of Leadership. Behind that, you'll find Brian Tracy's 3 Laws of Peak Performance in Leadership, Kevin Birchelman's 5 Laws of Leadership Survival, and then Dr. William Conan's 8 Universal Laws of Leadership, and these are in order according to the Google search engine, not necessarily 1, 2, 3, and 4, but based upon their dominance of use and their availability to everyone. I'm going to make a reference to these sites in our show notes. So when you go to our blog site, that is www.shepherdsadvantage.com, There in the show notes, you will find references to these other laws, and you can look them up and read them and study them further for your own learning. Well, how do we define leadership? And defining leadership is somewhat complicated, and yet it is rather simple. I believe that John Maxwell gives us a very concise and a very insightful way to look at a definition of leadership. He simply says this: influence, nothing more, nothing less. That's what leadership is. Well, when you really boil it all down to its essence, that's really all that it is, isn't it? Leadership is about influence. We are trying to influence others to preferred futures, preferred goals, preferred objectives, and so therefore it is about influence. It is about leading with an idea of influencing others. Steve Zajac defines leadership as inspiring others to pursue your vision with the parameters that you set, to the extent that it becomes a shared effort, a shared vision, and a shared success. Well, I like those definitions. I think that they all enhance and they build upon one another. But I think at the end of it, we're all saying the same thing, aren't we? Leadership is about influence. So regardless of how many leadership laws that there really are, and who knows, I'm always amused at these lists because they can always be expanded, and in fact sometimes they can shrink in size. But regardless of how many leadership laws that there are and how many definitions that we choose to create, there are two fundamental things that I want us to keep in mind in this inaugural presentation and the building blocks of Shepherd's Advantage Leadership Podcast Series. The first thing I want to say to us is that leadership requires the ability to do more than one thing. If we only had to do one thing, that would be pretty simple, wouldn't it? Just responsible for one thing. But as you well know, leadership is involved with so many different facets, so many different aspects of leadership, things that we don't even anticipate, things that we don't even really realize that are there that we're going to be responsible for. So it requires us to multitask. It requires us to be proficient in several areas. And then the second thing I want to say to us is that no one can perform all laws proficiently. So no matter how many laws that we create in a list, we're never going to be able to perform these laws proficiently and to accomplish them. However, with that said, that doesn't mean that we're not going to try and that we're going to stop growing and learning. I believe that leadership is a life journey of learning. I believe it is very important for us to learn and to be life learners. So therefore, in those areas that we're weak, then we're going to strive to become strong. Well, John Maxwell's 21 irrefutable laws of leadership are going to be the basis of this foundational teaching series, this inaugural beginning of Shepherd's Advantage leadership podcast series. It's going to set the foundation of everything that will be developed at Shepherd's Advantage Incorporated, everything moving forward in this series and all that we hope to accomplish and all of the various things that we're going to bring to the table in this podcast series. This is the foundation. This is where it all begins. These are the building blocks on which the structure of leadership development through Shepherd's Advantage will be constructed. These are the foundation stones that are going to guide our discussion of leadership in a nonprofit context. And again, as I said earlier, I do realize that leadership principles are what they are, and it is not to say that there is one set of principles for nonprofits and another set of principles for-profit corporations, but let's understand that the context with which we're going to discuss and the illustrations that we're going to use are going to be in a nonprofit context. That's really where my ultimate passion is at, and boy, there are a lot of things that I want to say about the current context of nonprofit leaders. And so it's going to be the foundation. It will set that foundation for everything that we're going to develop. These are the foundation stones that's going to guide the discussion of leadership for us moving forward. And so with that said, there are 4 things to keep in mind in the beginning of this series. Number 1, the laws can be learned. So it really doesn't matter if you're not proficient in all of them. They can be learned. These are disciplines by which we apply ourselves to, and we can learn them. And that's important for us to know. So don't be overwhelmed if somehow or another that you're not proficient and you can't or you don't have that skill set. Please understand, you can learn. You have that ability to gain knowledge, gain insight, gain experience, and apply these laws to those that you're trying to influence. Secondly, the laws can stand alone and yet complement all the other laws. So we can take any one law and use it for its unique discipline and unique aspect that it brings to the leadership process. But yet at the same time, it complements all of the other laws. So therefore, no one law supersedes or is more superior than the other. They are all mutually beneficial and add value in the leadership process. Number 3, the laws carry consequence, meaning your effectiveness can be hindered by ignoring or choosing not to grow in them. So the choice is yours, but the consequence is real. And then lastly, number 4, the laws are the foundation of all that we call leadership. So if we're going to talk about leadership, we have to understand at the outset of this inaugural presentation that they are foundation to what we call leadership. So leadership is called a lot of things. It's job title, it's position, it's status, it's seniority, it's a lot of these kinds of things. But may I suggest that many times our definitions of these things are inadequate. They are based upon the wrong presumptions or based upon the wrong criteria. I have been a pastor in churches before in which I was not the leader. I may have carried the title as pastor, but there were other influencers that were within the congregation that really carried the voice. And so you learn very quickly to learn to work and to partner with those that really have the influence in order to accomplish greater goals. So leadership, these foundational blocks, these laws are all part of what we call leadership. So learn them well, and apply them to your learning. Each law is like a special tool that you pick up out of a toolbox, and boy, God only knows that I love tools. I've always had an aspiration to have one of those very large Craftsman tool chests, roller bearing drawers, and just filled with tools. I love mechanical things. I love working. Certainly have done my share of working on motors in the day. But at this point in life, the tools are different. We're now involved in digital media and so many other things. But each of these laws are just like a tool that you take out of the toolbox and you use them to add value to other people. You add value to other people by enhancing their dreams and their character. And so let's use them as tools for equipping, as tools that will assist others in being able to develop their dreams and chase after their goals. So let's begin this journey with the very first law. The first law that we're going to look at now with this introduction behind us is the law of the lid. The law of the lid. Your leadership ability determines your level of effectiveness. The lower your ability to lead, the lower the lid is on your potential. The higher your ability to lead, the higher the lid is on your potential. You cannot lead anyone past your own thinking. Let me say that again. That is powerful. You cannot lead anyone past your own thinking. Growth is required. So, if we're going to be effective leaders, then we're going to have to increase our capability of leading. We are going to have to invest in ourselves. In other words, we cannot change the circumstance with the same thinking that created it. So therefore, we need a new way of thinking. And can I just say that in this modern context of ours, we need some new ways of thinking about how to lead in this 21st century. Consider the story of Dick, Maurice, and Ray. If you have a copy of the 21 Laws of Leadership, this is a story that is contained in there about these three gentlemen. Dick and Maurice were fellow New Englanders, and they had a dream, and they desired to chase after that dream, so much so they left New England and moved all the way to the West Coast, moved to California. And there in California, they searched for a business opportunity, and they opened up a theater in Glendale, California, and that venture failed miserably, as a matter of fact. And so they had drive, they had passion, they knew they wanted to do something and make a difference, and so they ended up buying a drive-in restaurant in Pasadena in 1937, and it was there that they had great success. They moved from Pasadena to San Bernardino in 1940, and they expanded their menu to include hot dogs, French fries, shakes, barbecue sandwiches, pork sandwiches. In fact, in the day, they made $200,000 a year with this fast food restaurant. That was very impressive in 1940s and quite an accomplishment. But realizing that there were things that were changing, and isn't it funny how that we do realize that things change? Boy, how I look over the course of my own life and see how that nonprofit leadership has radically changed and radically shifted from where it started to where it's at now. Dick and Maurice realized that things were changing for them. And so they began to study how to mechanize kitchen operations, and their goal was to fill every order within 30 seconds. They succeeded, or did they? Enter Ray Kroc. Dick and Maurice McDonald, in their plans of mechanization and developing a way to fulfill orders within 30 seconds, they began to franchise it, and they began to think, well, franchising is the way to go. And however, they had only sold 15 franchises on their hamburger operations, and then out of the 15, there was a much smaller number that had even committed to do anything with those franchises. And so enter Ray Kroc. Ray Kroc struck a deal with the McDonald's brothers in 1961. Ray Kroc had kind of revolutionized a fast way to make milkshakes, and he had those products and equipment, and he was quite the entrepreneur, quite the leader. And so he struck a deal with the McDonald's brothers in 1961, and he bought McDonald's for $2.7 million. And he had opened 500 McDonald's within 4 years, and today there are over 31,000 restaurants in 119 countries of the world. Ray Kroc had a lid of leadership that far exceeded Dick and Maurice. So, Dick and Maurice had an idea to mechanize their kitchen operations, filling orders within 30 seconds, but they did not have the lid to take them to the next level. So the higher that you want to climb, the more you need leadership. The greater the impact that you want to have, the greater your influence needs to be. I believe that success is within the reach of every person. However, that success without leadership ability will bring a limited effectiveness. In order to increase your level of effectiveness, you can either increase your dedication to success or excellence, or you can increase your level of leadership by becoming a student of leadership principles. Leadership has a multiplying effect. So, learning is required. To change the direction of any organization, the leader must change. Now, either that leader literally must be changed, or the leader must change within themselves. Leadership ability is always the lid on personal and organizational effectiveness. If a person's leadership is strong, the organizational lid will always be high. But if not, the organization is limited, always and forever. Personal and organizational effectiveness is proportionate to the strength of the leader. In order to reach the highest level of effectiveness, you have to raise the lid one way or another. The good news is, getting rid of the leader is not the only way. So how do we apply this law of the lid? I want to suggest a few things. First of all, make a list of 5 to 10 major goals that will require 12 months or longer. A lot of times we want fast payoffs, we want instant gratification, but in this exercise, I want to challenge you to think a little further out in terms of time sequence. I want you to think about 12 months or longer. In fact, Bob Beale always had a statement. He said, "We tend to overestimate what we can do in 12 months and underestimate what we can do in 5 years." So identify those that are going to require the assistance of others. Of that list of 5 to 10, who are you going to have to contact? Who will need to come along beside you to help you? This will challenge your leadership effectiveness. The second thing I want to suggest in applying this law is evaluate your leadership effectiveness by using the evaluation tool in John Maxwell's book. If you have a copy of the 21 Laws of Leadership, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, there is Appendix A in the back of that book, and there is a leadership effectiveness assessment tool that's there. Take the time and go through that. I'll try to highlight that and reference that in the show notes for you. Thirdly, ask other people to rate you in terms of your leadership skill. Your planning, your strategic planning, your vision, getting results. Do that on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being very minimal, 10 just being off the charts, knocking it out of the park. Average the scores to give you a sample snapshot of how others perceive you. Finally, I certainly want to encourage you to contact Shepherd's Advantage. One of the premier tools that we offer is a Berkman questionnaire for coaching. The coaching report and even the Berkman 360 are extremely powerful tools to give you a snapshot of others and their perception of your leadership capability. These are tools that I have been using for a number of years. They are very powerful and very efficient in helping you to grow your leadership capability. Well, our time is coming to a close here, and I am just so very excited. Thank you. Thank you for choosing to be a part of this inaugural run, this inaugural opportunity for us, and we are so very grateful for your time. Again, we thank you. Thank you for choosing to be a part of this run with us, and until the next time, we will continue in this 21 Laws series with Law number 2 and Law number 3. God bless, and may the Almighty strengthen your leadership learning and your influence.